What's the one thing you can never do? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods talking about how we can do better in life one small step at a time. I've been thinking about this episode for a long time. And it's not that it's a trendy topic, because I don't think it is. It's not even a best-selling book I read about. Usually a lot of my ideas come from books that I'm reading. It's because it's something that I keep watching happen to people and people I care about. And maybe it's happening to you too, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. The idea is, think about this, and this is just an analogy because it can come in many different forms. Someone gets hurt. They hurt their back, or they need a knee replacement. And, something that, finally basically just gave out after years of something happening. And the doctor says, you have to go to physical therapy. This is just an example. Physical therapist gives the person exercises to do, for a few weeks, few months. And they maybe they keep doing it for a little bit. They do the work, and it's hard, and it's slow, and it's not very satisfying. And then they just stop. They just stop. They stop doing the thing that the doctor did, and there's no announcement, essentially, that they just find reasons to stop going back to physical therapist. It's too far. It's too expensive. It hurts. It's not really working. I'm not moving as fast as I thought I would be. And somewhere in the underneath of it all, it sounds reasonable. The person is saying, what's the point that I should be doing this anymore? Why should I be doing the things that the physical therapist says I should do? What is the reason that I should continue to go see the physical therapist? Like I said, this is just a very specific reason. This might be going to see a psychologist that's helping you through a mentally tough time. Maybe this is you going through a diet that hasn't been successful in the last few weeks, and then you quietly walk away from it. There's all sorts of places where we stop in life, and then maybe a year later, you're in a wheelchair. You stopped walking the dog. You've given up on your hobbies that you used to love doing, like gardening or going out hiking or dancing at weddings, because now it's just too hard. It hurts too much, and you can't do it anymore. You've lost the ability to do something because you're not following through on your physical therapy, as the previous example, and you're not motivated to even go back and trying to it. And I've watched this happen, and maybe you have too. Here's the thing. The injury version of this story is just one version, like I said. There are others that start wherever it is, whatever's happening in your lifetime. Maybe you were trying to go back to school, and you didn't work very hard at it, and you just decided to quietly walk away from whatever your goals were in going back to school. Maybe you were trying to do something that was difficult, and you just decided to give up on that particular piece. Maybe you're modeling a certain kind of behavior, and eventually you just decide, that you're going to give up on it. And that's basically what happens, is sometimes we end up as people not where we intended to go, but instead rather where we ended up. This is where we ended up. And this story, like I said, is all sorts of varieties of stories, and they are real. Quiet giving up in life. It starts out very gradually, and maybe just an invisible skipping this or skipping that, and eventually just moves into giving up entirely. And I want to talk about the sides of the story because, it's actually the same story, whether or not you give up drastically at one point or you just give up quietly and slowly. The endings are what actually matters in all of this, because I want to start to change those endings. I want those endings to be happier. And sometimes we're just making small decisions in the right direction and doing it again and again. And that's what makes something extraordinary happen in our lives. I was thinking about it. I just wanted an episode. Just don't quit. Please just do not quit in life. And I have a friend, and right now, she got hurt, and she is not quitting. She is fighting this. She is doing her physical therapy. She is going out and doing the things she needs to do to get over an injury, and it's working. And she is going to see this happen in her life, where she comes out the other side. And I have other people who have given up, and they are not. They are not going to come out of this on the other side. This is, like I said, let's look at the analogy we started with, the physical therapy analogy, because I think it's one of the clearest illustrations of how giving up actually works. Essentially, when someone quietly quits PT, they almost never think of it as giving up. They think that they're being realistic. The progress is slow, the effort is hard, the cost is high. Physically, it costs a lot of money to go to physical therapy. The results aren't immediate. They're not dramatic enough. And at some point, the gap between where they're at and where they hoped that they were going to be feels too wide. And it's so wide that they feel that continuing on just feels foolish. Why even bother? I'm not making any progress. This isn't happening fast enough. This isn't getting any better. And what actually is happening in this particular case is the body, after an injury or surgery, needs consistent, sustained work to rebuild it. And it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be, massive. It's consistent. It's small improvements over time. And the people who will regain full function after a knee replacement or a hip replacement or after surgery will take a tough, slow, disciplined path to getting better. These are the people who are going to show up even when the progress doesn't feel visible or dramatic. The people who don't fully recover are the ones who hit that wall of pain, whether it's financial pain or discouragement or the tediousness of slow progress, and they just make the decision one day to stop, to just quietly just stop. And that decision has a huge cost, and the cost is oftentimes permanent. And I don't say this to be harsh because I was there too. Essentially, it was probably about a decade ago, I screwed up my left ankle where I busted both of the tendons in my left ankle. And then because I was leaning on my right ankle so much to support me, the left ankle went too. So 4 tendons in 2 ankles, and I could barely walk. I hobbled around. I worked for a company where I had to travel to customer sites. And so I would have to walk and stand for training classes 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and I was limping. I could barely walk. And I would go to conferences and I could barely walk. And I gave up. I gave up on the physical therapy because it wasn't doing anything. I wasn't getting anywhere. It wasn't making anything better. And then I stopped. And so basically for 2 years, it got worse and worse and worse. And it was not really getting better. And it was someone at my work who said something to me, but are you even doing the physical therapy? And I said, no, it wasn't really doing much. I wasn't getting anywhere. It costs a lot of money. All the same reasons I gave you there. And then I realized I should really be doing the things that the experts who know how people recover from this do it. And so I dug out all the pieces of paper that the physical therapist gave me, and I started religiously doing the exercises, even though they seemed dumb. It was wrapping a band around my foot, and I was drawing the alphabet with my toes with a rubber band holding on them. And I'm like, what is this even doing? This is so weird. And you know what? After I started doing what the physical therapist told me to do, guess what happened? My ankle got better. Both my ankles got better. Then I went back and started seeing my trainer again, who helped me get into physical shape before, and she rebuilt me back up again. She rebuilt back all the muscles, of all the, because you just start, as soon as something breaks in your leg chain, everything else, your knees get weird, your hips get weird, and she rebuilt me back. And I walk now today perfectly. I walk better than I ever have. I don't have a limp. You wouldn't have known from that time period that I was ever going to get better. And like I said, I know it. I'm not saying any of this to be harsh because I was at that point too, and people don't fully reckon what they've decided to do at that moment where they decide to give up. The decision feels like a huge relief. And instead, what it is, it's a trade-off for short-term relief for a long-term loss. Had I not gone back and done the things that the physical therapist told me to do and went through the hard work, I went back to physical therapy, and then I went back to my trainer and rebuilt all those muscles, no matter how painful it was. Now I'm fine. Now everything is fine, and you never would have known that I walked with a limp or could barely walk for nearly 2 years. So when people quietly quit these situations, like I said, they don't know that they're really giving up a huge long-term loss in something that really matters. Let's talk about the other version of this. Some people grew up in circumstances, that probably sent them a message about what's possible in life. Maybe it was a small town that offered one kind of a future if you were to stay there. Maybe it was a school that was underfunded and overwhelmed, or a family where the family was just struggling and everything was just, everything was a struggle inside this family. And you realize that nobody had the bandwidth to help anyone in this family. And you could go somewhere else and you could go have a different life. The world is bigger than this, you might think to yourself. I could get out of this situation. Those kinds of messages get inside of you. And it feels like the people who absorb them and, who get those kind of messages, they're human. We all sort of build a map in our brain of what is possible in our lives based on what we see around us. We've seen people who injure themselves and they never walk again. Well, that's just what happens when you get older. Or, well, I walk with a limp, but you know what? There's a lot of people who walk out there with a limp. I guess that's just something that happens, and this was just my time. What happens is when we build this map in our heads, whether it's a physical injury or the town we grew up in or our circumstances, hey, I only, went to some part of college, I'll never get a good job. Whatever it is you're telling yourself in your head, oh, I'm just ditzy, I'll never get a good job. Whatever it is, the problem when your internal map is wrong, when what the ceiling is that you think exists isn't actually your story. You've imagined that you can only walk this well or get this high in life or, make progress in this thing. I'm never going to lose weight. It's just never going to happen for me. Whatever that story is that you're telling yourself, people mistaken that for a real limitation. They have this, instead, a limited perspective on their limited environment, and they don't even know what's possible. They have given up in life because they think nothing else is possible in their particular circumstance. And here's the thing about it, is it's insidious, the way it works out. Again, it doesn't look like you're giving up. Sometimes it looks like you're being pragmatic, being realistic, not getting your hopes up, not settling yourself up to fail. It can masquerade to us as wisdom. I'm just looking at things realistically. I'm just setting myself up for realistic expectations. And instead, what it is, it's just discouragement that has taken on a life of its own and has now hardened ourselves to not even seeing what's possible in our lives. It's a different kind of giving up. And these stories about the ankles that don't get rehabbed, the knees that don't get rehabbed, the life that just gets quietly accepted, well, I'm just going to have a small life because that's just the way I've done it. Maybe you've decided because you have a family member you need to take care of, you can never get a good job because you need to take care of that family member. Did you ever stop to think that maybe a better job would help you take care of that family member even better? We just start quietly accepting a smaller life because it's sane, it's practical, and the mechanics of that at its core is that you've made a decision gradually and basically without fanfare. You stopped trying. You gave up on life. You maybe you never even tried at all because you have put this mental map in your head of how life turns out for you. And I want to be direct about that because I don't want this episode to feel like a lecture because I've been there too. I don't want to sit there and say, well, just try harder. It's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am going to say is that it's not about becoming extraordinary. And I'm not going to say, too, that if you push yourself hard enough, you can do anything. Sky's the limit. And that's not true either. It's not even that useful to say that. There are limitations. Some of them are very, very real. Some circumstances are genuinely hard to get over. Some injuries don't fully heal. And some doors genuinely aren't open for everyone. That's the realistic aspect of life. This is not about being so positive that we can imagine anything is possible. I'm here to tell you that sometimes things don't happen for a reason. I'm here to tell you sometimes your attitude isn't the only thing that's between you and your goals and your dreams. That sometimes the people who are struggling and overcome it aren't because they just want it more. These kinds of thinkings kind of dismiss kind of the real pain behind things, and I don't have a lot of patience for that. This is not about the hustle culture, and I don't want to lead you to exhaustion as a virtue. I don't think burning yourself out is a sign of commitment, and I don't think the people who don't burn themselves out are lazy. We have talked about things like this in other episodes, and I mean it. Here's the thing about it. The very specific decision to stop doing whatever it is you're doing, to give up on a particular version of your life, that is still possible. And the cost of that decision doesn't always get clearly identified. There's a gap between what is genuinely out of your control and what is actually a choice that you've made that looks like inevitability. It's inevitable I'm never going to walk again. It's inevitable that I'm never going to lose the weight. It's inevitable that I'm never going to get a job that has decent benefits that lets me take care of my mom. We get those ideas in our head, and that's not true. There are some things out of your control. You know what? I'm never going to be an NBA player. I am 5 foot tall. I'm never going to be a CEO because I don't want to do that kind of work to put myself in that kind of position. But there are actually choices out there that you do have to make that are in your control. And just because it looks to you as an inevitable failure doesn't mean it's true. The gap is real. That is, a lot of us living it haven't examined in a while. If we give up something, it feels like not a decision. It feels like, well, like I said, it's just practical, it's realistic, I'm not setting myself up to failure. The thing that is so easy to miss in that is the same small, individually reasonable choices are within your control. I'll skip PT today because I'm super tired. I'll look for a job next week. I'll start eating better after the holidays. I'll get back to going back to school and getting that degree I always wanted to do after things get calm. Like I said, looks very reasonable. Small, individual, reasonable decisions. But each one of those are defensible. Each one of those seem really practical. And maybe on a given day, each one of those seem like they might be the right call. But when they become a pattern, when the skips and postponements and the after whenevers stack up, now something has shifted in all of this. The door hasn't slammed shut in front of your face. It is just slowly drifting closed. So you don't even notice that the door is starting to close on you because it's so slow, and it is slowing. Sometimes a psychologist will call this learned helplessness. It's a pattern that develops when a person experiences situations where their efforts don't seem to change the outcomes. They begin to generalize it like, I just can't, nothing works. I can't get there. If trying didn't work, then why would it work again if I tried harder? If things were too hard before, why are they going to be easier now? The nervous system starts to short circuit the attempts before they even begin in an attempt to just make you feel like you're not going to attack yourself. I don't want to set myself up for disappointment. Your brain is almost trying to protect you. It's not a weakness. It's how humans basically understand its situation and tries to create sort of a protective response to it. But if you don't recognize it, it can quietly start closing off all your possibilities and some of those possibilities that are still open to you. The other part of this that researchers call it is called the intention action gap. This has been my big problem in life too. Most people who give up on their physical therapy, their education, their health, their goals, it's not like that they stopped caring about the outcomes of their lives. They still want those things. They still want to be able to walk again or get their degree or get thinner and lose the weight and get healthier. They still fully intend on getting back to it someday. But the gap between the intention of what you want to happen in your life and then the actual daily action it takes to make it happen, that gap starts to widen gradually, invisibly, until the intention is just a story we tell ourselves about the future that never quite arrives. Someday I'm going to lose this weight. I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to start getting in shape and I'm going to lose weight. Someday I'm going to go back to college and finish my degree. Someday I'm going to apply for other jobs that are better for me. But as that gap is increasingly widening, it becomes incredibly harder. And so in the end, none of this means that you're doomed. It means that there's a pattern out there and it has a name. And all of these things with a named pattern can be interrupted. It can change for you. And this is the real heart of it. How do we change our endings? And I've thought about like this about a lot because I've known so many people who have just given up in life. And if you're one of those people who have thought about giving up, I want to give you kind of an honest answer about it. Not the inspiring answer, the dreamy one, but an honest answer. Motivation, it's not about motivation. Motivation is real, but it's not reliable. Motivation comes and goes. It spikes after a good conversation or a podcast that really cheers us up, and it fades by Thursday night. Building the recovery of your life or of your health, of your finances, of your job, built on motivation is like building it on sand. It shifts all the time. It's also not willpower. Willpower is finite. It depletes throughout the day. It gets eroded by stress and poor sleep and hundreds of small decisions. People with strong willpowers aren't stronger than you. They've just arranged their lives so that they don't need willpower. They need less willpower in their lives. So what changes your ending is a decision. And it's not dramatic. It's a moment of a transformation. Just one clear, quiet, private decision. I'm not going to quit on this. That's the decision. That's it. I'm not going to give up. It's not that I'm going to crush this thing or I'm going to become perfect or I'm going to be a different person. Just, I'm not done. I'm going to keep going. And maybe it's going to be slow. And maybe it's going to be imperfect, but I'm not stopping. I am going to keep going. James Clear in Atomic Habits made this point about that every action you take is a vote of what kind of person you're becoming. You don't have to transform overnight. You just have to cast one vote in the right direction. One small action. One kept appointment to the physical therapist. One return phone call to a job you applied for, an application you filled out, or one night of going to bed earlier, or one meal of eating healthier. Every vote you put into that category doesn't have to be impressive. It just has to be cast. This is what I've kind of observed about my own life and the lives of the people around me that I've watched closely. The people who end up somewhere meaningful, someplace different from where they started, aren't the ones who are the most talented, the most resourceful, the ones who have the most money or the more resources behind them, or even the people that are most motivated. They're the ones who keep going when it's not yet working, who did the boring, uncomfortable, unsexy work of showing up time and time again, maybe even after they didn't show up yesterday. The one who quietly and repeatedly decides they're not finished. They are going to keep going. That's available to you. It's not an extraordinary version of you. It's just the version of you that's not quitting. That's the important part of it. There's always a story I always liked, and it is kind of like one of those parable stories where I think it came out of Asia, where it says a man was telling his son, I guess he was talking to his son about, his anger problems or something like that. And he says, "Son, there's 2 tigers growing inside of you, one of peace and one of anger." And the son said, "Well, which one is going to win?" And he says, "It's whichever one you feed." You're going to feed or cast that vote, like James Clear says, in one direction or the other. One tiger is going to be fed, and I've always kept that in mind. Am I feeding the tiger that is going to lead to a healthier life? Or am I feeding the tiger that is going to result in me sitting on the couch playing video games? Which tiger am I feeding right now? And that's you casting a vote. These stories, I think, are the real places where we have real obstacles in our life. When we stop doing physical therapy, stop pursuing our degree, stop trying to change our health habits, it always goes with the story that we have. And the story always, like I said, feels sensible and inevitable. I'm going to give up on the diet anyway. It's not going to work. It hasn't worked in the past. It's not going to work now. You know what? I never get the job I want. I might as well just stop. The story sounds maybe even like I'm too old for this. Or, people I know didn't really do this kind of thing. They didn't go out and get the things they wanted. Or I tried it before and it didn't work. I've just never had that kind of discipline. Or, I'm just kind of a muddled thinker. I can never get the things I want. The one I think that's the most dangerous of them all is this is just how my life is. When you ask yourself something very gently but directed, how do you know that story you're telling yourself is even true? How do you even know that? Maybe some of it's true. Maybe some of the circumstances that have shaped you are real. The failures that have discouraged you in the past, they really actually happened. I'm not asking you to pretend something that isn't true, but the conclusion is how then do you know if you stop? That's how it is. So then the conclusion of this is that for the people who are over, who thinks it's over, they just stop in life. That's actually what's going to happen. That's part of the interpretation. Essentially, if you stop, it will all become true. You won't get your degree. You won't lose your weight. You won't get the job you've always been looking at. And that interpretation is going to become reality. But the idea is that interpretations can be wrong. The person who grew up in a town with no opportunities went on to build a different kind of life, didn't have better circumstances. They had a story about what those circumstances meant. They decided somehow, somewhere, that they were not going to map out the territory that's been handed to them, that their ceiling was not somebody else's ceiling, that their ceiling is their own ceiling, not the other person that they went to school with ceiling. The person who did the physical therapy and regained the function after a devastating injury didn't have an easier recovery of it. They just decided that the temporary cost of doing the work was worth it, was worth more than having a permanent disability, of being permanently in a wheelchair and never walking again. You do not have to accept the story of the situation that's handed to you. You're allowed to question it. You're allowed to write a different ending for it. This is not a superhero ending. It's just a better one than quitting. If you think about it, like I said, I don't want to do any sort of vague inspiration of how we actually avoid, getting into these ruts. If you look at the smallest possible version of the thing that you've been skipping, Like, if you've been skipping physical therapy, not quitting means if you I think making it concrete is the way we go. Vague inspiration is one of the ways we actually avoid doing anything. It looks like the smallest possible version of a thing. If you've been skipping PT, but not quitting, it means that you and think of it this way, that if you've been skipping your physical therapy, not quitting doesn't mean going 5 days a week and just pushing through the pain. It might be doing one exercise, just one. Researchers on behavior look at change as being research on behavior change is pretty consistent on this. The person who does one rep every day a month is fundamentally different position than the person who did zero. Starting small feels meaningful, and smaller feels like enough where you are at least not stopping. The point here is not to stop. It looks like removing barriers and not increasing the effort. A lot of people who solve their motivation problems with willpower, it rarely works. What works is making the thing easier to do. Can you do your physical therapy exercise before you do anything else in the morning so that there's no other decisions to get in the way? Can you put in an application that's been sitting on your desk for weeks now so that it's sitting right in front of you? Every time you sit down at your computer, you see it kind of staring at you. Can you just arrange one thing, just one thing, so that the right action is the path of least resistance instead of the extra effort on top of an already full day? It looks like getting back on after you fall off the horse. The one important thing is that not quitting means that, and the important part here is not quitting doesn't mean that you're never going to stop. Not quitting doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect. It means that you're not going to let a stop become a quit. If you miss a day of exercise, at least you're not quitting exercise. If you miss a physical therapy appointment, it doesn't mean that you're quitting physical therapy. If you have a week where everything just kind of falls apart, the question is not whether or not that happens. It will. There are times when your diet will fall apart, when your goals on finding a new job will fall apart, when your time just falls apart where you're not able to study when you're trying to get your degree that you've always wanted to happen. People who make sustained progress are not the ones who never fall off the wagon. They're the ones who have a short recovery time. They maybe miss a day, they don't catastrophize it. They show up again the next day after that. It looks like accountability, because accountability is not a personality trait. You're not either accountable or not accountable. It's a tool. If you are trying to keep going on something that's hard, tell one person, not so that you can boast about it, right? And not because you're trying to create pressure for yourself, but by saying it out loud, it changes how you think about it and how you start feeling about it. And having even one person know what you're working on and who can be in your corner and cheer for you could be the difference between getting back up again after it fell apart or quietly disappearing and just giving up. I started this episode, like I said, thinking about people I know who just let life quietly go. They let the good things in their life quietly go. They still had the time to make things possible. And I think about those moments, which always seems to exist, where the direction could have changed at any moment, where the next small step was available to them, and the story was not finished, and yet they finished it for themselves. I think part of my life and part of me coming through a lot of the things I grew up with was me just deciding I was just not going to quit. I wasn't just going to give up. I wasn't just going to stop with what life handed me. And if right now you're at one of those moments too, maybe there's something that you've been drifting away from that you fully haven't admitted to yourself that you're quietly quitting. Something that used to matter to you, something that you've been telling yourself is just on pause. We're just having a hard time right now, but that pause has been so long, it now is starting to feel a bit more permanent. And I want to say this as clearly and as kindly as I can, is that it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be extraordinary, and you don't have to be perfectly consistent, and you don't have to have the ideal circumstances or the ideal health or the ideal schedule or the ideal starting point. You just have to decide not to quit. And then you make the next smallest possible move in that direction. You're voting in the direction of what it is. And it's not always going to be easy, and it's not always going to work out exactly the way you hoped it is, because the version of you that keeps going, even slowly, even imperfectly, is better than the version of you who stopped entirely. The version of you is still available to you today. I think about, dieting in a sense, that how many times I started to diet and then it would go very slowly and I wouldn't lose weight. You know what's funny is I tried to lose weight for, let's call it 40 years. And if I wasn't losing weight at a decent clip or I went backwards some week, I would just give up entirely. Had I just kept on that diet, let's just say I lost, people always say that diets are sort of between 1 and 2 pounds a week is somewhat reasonable in losing weight. What if I just said for 40 years that I was going to lose 1/4 pound a week? That basically I would have been done with my diet decades ago, no matter how slow it was, if I had just kept up with it and just kept consistent and allowed myself to have good weeks and bad weeks. The time would have won out. That essentially I would have, let's say, like I said, just say I lost 3 pounds a year for 40 years. That was 120 pounds. That would have been enough. It would have worked out anyway. And chances are I wouldn't have just lost 1/4 pound a week. I would have lost more some weeks and not lost some other weeks. But because I kept giving up, the goal kept going out in front of me. Now I have lost the weight. But slow progress is better than no progress. And it's better than quietly quitting. So this week, I guess I want you to think about one thing that you've been quietly stepping away from and say it out loud. Write it down, name it. And after that, just create one small move, and everything else comes after that. I hope that helps you out a little bit. Like I said, I've watched too many people that I care about give up on life, and I don't want you to be one of them. You can always email me at you can always email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. You can see all my podcasts at jillfromthenorthwoods.com. I'd love to hear what's going on with you. Thanks so much for being out there, and I'll see you next week.